what's the evidence showing you? What evaluation and analysis have you done? What's your interpretation? And sometimes there can be more than one way of interpreting that information. So it can well be that you say, well, it could be X or it could be Y, but on the basis of this evidence and also some evidence that I've shown previously or in another graph, it looks like this material or this reaction is successful or is working in this way.
Finding your voice, probably in any context, is a bit challenging, or can be challenging, and certainly so in academic writing. A supervisor can support you in developing that sense of voice within the context of a dissertation. But I think probably the main thing is just to reflect on the writing that you're producing. So it's to think about what am I writing here? Is the purpose of my writing, is the argument that I'm putting across coming across clearly and distinctly?
Find relevant literature and read it. Don't feel that every piece of literature you find you have to cite or use. So start with titles and abstracts and try and home in on the papers that you think are most relevant to the argument you want to make. I'd recommend people, when you're writing the literature review or when you're constructing an argument, don't sit on a computer typing things out of the papers, because what happens is those papers have been very carefully honed. So you'll look at that writing and think there's no way of saying that better, but actually what you're doing is creating your own argument. So in your own argument and in that context, there will be better ways of expressing what's said in those papers you want to cite.
A good argument in a dissertation should be something that is based on the evidence but also includes your voice, your opinion. You have to show that you know what's going on in that discipline. You have to present the arguments that other people have published. Work in a very considered way. So instead of saying this particular paper is rubbish, you'd say this particular paper was of its time, but now there are certain weaknesses. So you would develop that kind of very academic way of saying that you don't agree with it without being rude. So in a good argument, you should evidence it, you should corral the opinions of others, but you should use those to back up your argument. You should also make sure that you have covered a range. So it looks very bad if a student has read all the papers from one particular school of thought and said, yeah, clearly this is brilliant, and then has neglected to even show that they're aware that there are alternatives, things like that. And then say, clearly the analysis of these papers is coming out on the side of this, or it's coming out on the side of that. That's how you should form an argument. And obviously, when I'm reading it, I need to see that the argument you've come out in favour of does actually match the evidence that you presented. So many times I've seen students go over and over papers and it's clearly looking like they're going to land on a certain point of view, and then they're just like, oh no, something else. So does your evidence match the sort of the final analysis that you're coming to? It should be fair, it should be sensible, and it's a little bit like doing the structure. You have to get certain things into the story before you can pronounce what your argument is, because otherwise people won't know what's going on. And they should lead naturally from one to the other. So you might look at one school of thought and then another school of thought and then say, clearly the evidence is pressing in this direction, I would like to add my thoughts, which are this. You're allowed to do that. This is your piece of work. It should have a sensible flow so that people are not sort of going, what, and having to go back to the next page because you've sort of jumped from topic to topic. The argument should be yours. You should have some passion in it. You should have your own voice in it, but it's important that that is an informed voice.
A good argument is clear and it's manageable and it's aware of its own limitations. If you're really struggling to formulate your argument, you're probably trying to say too many things at once.